Connecting streaming software to go live. Viewers will. Okay. So I think what we're going to see is like there's going to be a slight delay on whatever version of the YouTube link that you watch. But other than that, I think we're set. And with that, I think we're also live. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for joining us. We have a very, very exciting thing going on today. As you can tell, you wouldn't have clicked on this link if you didn't know. But we've got Tara Stark, we've got Erik Nystul, Michael Green, and Senator Dan McCay from Utah. Well, two of those are from Utah. And we are going to be talking all about the adoption process, especially now that it's finally through, for the Utah flag. And I think, like, as last time, we should probably give like a little just brief introduction of who we are and what we do in the flag space here. So on my screen, it starts with Tara. So Tara, go ahead and take it away as far as...
Yeah, my name is Tara Stark. Born and raised here in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Big proponent of the Keystone flag behind me. I guess my biggest thing is just honestly talking about the ways in which a good flag can bring people together, ways in which good flags can bring community, and bringing a good flag to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely. Next on my screen is Erik. Erik, what's your whole deal?
Hello, I am Erik, and maybe just here will be a good chance to explain how I even know Dan McCay. When I was working at the Capitol a couple years ago, there was an event with the governor, and a lot of people were there, and I saw him walked up and said, "Hey, listen, we're going to accomplish some great things this legislative session, but I've had a dream of a flag for Utah since I was in elementary school." And he said, hey, let's be in touch. And ever since then, I've kind of snuck in the back, foot in the door of all the proceedings. However, one claim to fame is lately I was recently invited to a new commission called the Utah Symbols Commission. So having to do with state flag, state everything that is a symbol of Utah. So life lesson, if you love flags, just kind of put your name out there. They'll think you're weird for a little bit, and then they'll learn more about you. I mean, we're still weird, but yeah, I'm happy to be here. And yeah, this was a great opportunity to meet him and get involved.
Right on. Yeah, I am super happy to have you here. And also, I do remember talking with you about that, like very early age desire to see a Utah flag you could be a little bit more excited about. Anyway, Michael Green, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, hey, I'm Michael from Flags for Good. I am a big enough flag nerd where I get to make it my full-time job, which has been fun for the last almost 4 years now. I've been to Utah quite a bit. I love going out there. I've snowboarded there, some of the best snow on earth, as they like to say. And so I had made a design for a new Utah flag as part of a series that I was doing as just sort of a joke, and submitted it like to the contest like everybody else. And yeah, I'm just a big fan of flags. We sell the new Utah flag, obviously, and lots of versions of it as well, like pride versions and things. So that's why I'm here, I guess. And of course, I bankroll the pod.
Right. I mean, you're here because, like, contractually, you're obligated. Like, I have to have you here, otherwise, like, I don't get funding. But no. Jokes aside, Michael is here because he's been like in it from the start, as he mentioned, and as we'll go more into. And last but definitely not least, Senator Dan McCay is here as well.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Let's see. I'm a state senator in Utah, but I really work for Michael Green. He tells me what to do, and I do exactly what Michael Green tells me to do. That's pretty much like my life objective is how can I do whatever Michael Green tells me to do? I am a hapless victim, really a drone bot for Michael's string pulling. So there you go. I mean, is there anything else anybody needs to know? Really, this interview could have just included Michael and not really me. But all right,
No, yeah.
seriously,
Thanks for coming
I've been
anyway.
a state. Thanks, yeah. I've been a state senator for let's see, I've been a state senator for 6 years now, and then before that, I was in the state House of Representatives for 7 years. Total, I've been 13 years on Utah's Capitol Hill. I love the office jokes where Oscar constantly reminds Angela that he's just a state senator. He's not really like a senator, and I think there's a healthy amount of self-deprecation that probably needs to come along with the job. But I got interested really in the flag issue by accident, and we can talk about that more later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you and I are not so different in those regards because, again, like I would not be here if it weren't for Michael, and I do pretty much everything he says as well. He said to set this up. He said to, specifically invite these exact people, and here we are. So
I love how
that'll
uncomfortable
further.
he's getting, and that's actually making it better.
I was going to say that will further some theories with people that don't have great senses of humor. Anyway,
Yeah.
Okay, so introductions aside, I think the best place to start, as always, is with the start of this. So, Utah had basically, with some minor changes, the same flag for a lot of its existence. And I think I'll go to Actually, I think I'm going to go to Michael first on here. Like, what was it that made Utah specifically kind of something that you wanted to help out, to make better, for lack of a better way to put it?
Oh, I didn't.
Okay.
I had started Flags for Good, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, you really shouldn't start with this because this is completely tangential to the entire process. But
Okay. Well, you tell me how to moderate, and I'll tell you.
no. So I'll tell my side of the timeline because it was really actually coincidental
Yeah.
that I did a TEDx talk at USU, and literally the day before my talk was the day that they announced that they were going to do the commission, and my whole talk was about hey, states could have better flags because I had done this whole project of redesigning only the easy ones that were easy to redesign.
Right.
So I did this TEDx talk about this project that I was doing, and Utah was the one I showed because I was in Utah, right? Like it was just one of many, and I didn't really think it was even the best one of the set. And so, yeah, that was the reason that I guess I got all swept up in this because of just some coincidental timing. And yeah, I mean, I think my other redesigns are also good, and I don't know why I don't get as much shit for those two. But
All right. There are Mormons watching. We can't be.
oh, sorry.
Just kidding.
But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. We can get into the other stuff
Right.
later. But
Okay. Yeah. No.
that's
I guess
how I
like
guess I'm involved.
in my mind, the reason I wanted to start there was the 3 billboards outside Salt Lake City kind of thing.
Well, here's the thing. They made billboards too cheap. Like, digital billboards you can buy for 25 cents. I mean, it's way too cheap. And so I saw that and I was like, well, maybe this is a funny, and honestly, I did it so that I could make a TikTok about doing it. Like, I knew nobody was going to see it. Like, seriously. But like, you can make a TikTok about how you put up billboards, and that got way more views than the billboard itself. But apparently, Dan McCay did see it, which is just blows my mind.
Right. And let's go there next, actually. Erik, I want to get to your like childhood thing as well. But before we get to that, let's go to Dan seeing those billboards and kind of like what crossed your mind, or were you already kind of thinking it could use a change?
Yeah, so I think, Michael, did you put the billboards up? Were they in 2020, if I remember right? Something like that? Like it's just before COVID, if I remember right. But
it was after COVID because I started Flags for Good during COVID.
Okay.
So it was later, yeah.
Okay, so so really the flag redesign process started in Utah in 2018. Representative Steve Handy and Representative Kevin Stratton, they came up to the Hill. Steve Handy is a process guy. He loves process. Representative Stratton loves outcomes. And so he showed up, typical. Stratton showed up with a process, or sorry, Handy showed up with a process. Stratton showed up with a final result and said, here's the flag. And it was, they both got sent to the same committee. They both presented in the Republican caucus, like, here's this idea. And it kind of went over like a lead balloon, and they got sent to the same, they got sent to the same committee. And, back then I was in the House of Representatives. I was one of the votes that like said, no, we're not doing a new flag, in 2018. And so, killed it successfully, I guess, on both accounts. And so then it was, then they get to the interim, and shortly after that, I don't remember what came first, but I went to Mount Rushmore shortly after the legislative session, if I remember right.
This is a story I've
And
seen a few times. Yeah.
yeah, and
Sorry.
you walk down the avenue of flags, and and it's just this thing. And unbeknownst to me, in the midst of my kids bickering after a long car ride, I was looking for the Utah flag, and I didn't know this, but they have it organized alphabetically, and so you have to like walk, and Utah is not at the beginning of the alphabet, right? So I got through almost 24, 25 blue flags with a seal in the middle of it. And I'm like, oh, that is a lot of flags that were blue with a seal in them. And then, like, shortly after that, I went to a conference. It was a national conference of state legislators. They host these conferences every year. It's a nonpartisan thing, and they're focused on policy. And I tend to get into the tax-related issues. But one of the open meetings, somebody, I think at the hotel that was hosting the conference, or maybe at the conference center, they had the flags lined up in the room. On one side was the blue flags with seals and other things. And then on the other side of the room was like this interesting, I just call it the interesting group of flags. And sure enough, Texas and, those are over there. And there's like a crowd of people kind of looking at them like, oh, hey, there's Texas. Hey, there's, and then, then everybody's pointing over, not really looking at the other side. So I go to hang out with the lonely blue flags, and I got to pull out like 4 or 5 of them before I get to Utah. And I'm like, all right, maybe there's a problem. Right. And that was kind of, where it was. And then shortly afterwards, like around that same time, somebody sent me the Roman Mars talk about good flags and that kind of thing. And so I start digging. I'm into that thing. Like 5 or 7 minutes, and I'm realizing, okay, it's a big problem. Then we get to the end of the video, and I'm like all fired up. I call Representative Handy, and I said, dude, I'm in. How do we do this, and when do we go? And that was really the beginning of the suffering. I mean, excitement of getting a new flag.
Right. Well, I guess in your case, a little bit of both, which, again, we will get to as most things here. But yeah, no, good to hear. And good to hear that, like, at Mount Rushmore, where they are alphabetical, it's, I mean, maybe this is my bias, but you're going to go from Tennessee, which has a great flag, then Texas, which has a great flag, and then you're going to hit Utah, and you're going to be like, there's, as you said, an issue here that we need to maybe correct for.
Luckily, Pennsylvania was right before it, though, Andy, because I did feel better because, I had Pennsylvania right before it, so I did feel somewhat better.
Yeah, I'll learn the alphabet at one of these points, but right now, we should probably move on to... So, Erik, like, as you mentioned, you have had a long-standing interest in changing this flag, or, like, I guess, like, you can put it better, but, like, kind of like a flag that you really wanted to have pride in. Like, take us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, I actually, driving into work this morning, it was fun because the effective date of the flag was Saturday. And so now all the government offices and agencies are putting them up. On my way to work today, I passed my old elementary school, and they had the new flag flying. And it was like a full circle moment because that's where it started for me.
Right.
Two memories come to mind. One was we did like a cultural thing where students each held a flag, and I fell in love. I'm like, so there's so many different ones. They're all different colors and designs and symbols. And I learned that my ancestry has certain flags and got really into that. And then later on, when we were learning Utah history, we were talking about the state seal, talked about the seagull lilies, the bees, the arrows, what everything means, and I was into it. I was like, man, this is cool. And then they're like, and then this is the state flag, and I'm like, oh wait, it's just the same thing. I don't hate the seal, but I'm just like, other states get a seal with full of symbolism and a flag full of symbolism. So ever since that, like third, fourth grade time, little Erik has been excited for a flag for Utah. And I kind of come at it from a different direction than Tara does. Tara is like, I have a flag and it's better than what y'all have. I was going to be happy with whatever the result was of the committee.
Right.
I submitted a couple. I liked the hexagon idea, so I guess I got my way in that regard. But yeah, I was going to be happy with anything besides just our seal. I love our seal, but seals aren't flags.
Yeah. And I think.
By the way, he said little Erik. The guy is 6'5", 6'6", maybe. Erik. There was never a little Erik.
I've never met him, nor have I ever seen him directly standing next to you, Dan. Otherwise, I would probably.
It's always this.
Yeah. Erik, you mentioned something I want to touch on real quick.
Well, yeah, Tara.
I think we'll pair into things rather nicely.
No.
So you mentioned like, oh, I have a flag and it's better. Honestly, if we get a commission, they come up with something that people like better, then by all means, absolutely, I'm here for it. Utah and Minnesota have both proven that committees can be hit or miss depending on who you have on them, how those committees go through their selection process, who you're consulting or not consulting. And there's so many different factors that can go into that. I'm not going to say a committee's better. I'm not going to say my solution's going to be better because we can't know that until all of those pieces are in place. Right. What I will say is, from what y'all have described, it sounds like things really kicked off in Utah when you had a visual example. I think about Michael's example from the TED Talk and the billboard that Dan drove past, and then suddenly the senator's like, okay, maybe this works, and then sees Roman Mars, like, okay, yeah, no, these are some good examples of things we could be doing. I think about Utah's commemorative flag in 2019, I want to say, and how much resemblance that commemorative flag bears to what y'all wound up with, right? I'm not saying it's the Keystone flag or nothing. The Keystone flag, in my mind, is something that exists as an example of what you can do. It's an example of, how can you balance history and tradition and bold design in a way that gets people excited, right? And I think that's a huge thing that doesn't get brought up in abstract conversations about, well, should we have a new flag? Because the second people have a new flag, they're like, oh, hell yeah, this is great, right? But you don't get that from, should we replace our flag? Well, what's the point of that?
Right. So like asking it too open-ended rather than, those are the only two approaches there, really. But
yeah, that's kind of like what I said. The purpose of my Better State Flag series that I had done, it's not, literally, if you watch the end of my TEDx talk in Utah, I said, I'm not saying this has to be the flag. I'm just trying to show that you can have something better and that the states that have something better benefit from it. And Tara's doing the exact same thing. And that's why we sell the Keystone flag, because it is a bastion of what could be. And it's just, it's there to inspire. And I know we disagree on Minnesota's final outcome, and I don't know how we feel about Utah's final outcome, but I think it's
no Tennessee, but I like it. Dan, you are muted if you're trying to.
Yeah, I muted myself because my kids walked in for a second. It's interesting. The visual side of things it does really help capture the imagination, because shortly after, we then proposed the bill in 2019 again. So Rep. Handy had a bill, Representative Stratton, kind of had his bill, but they both died again in 2019 because, we just hadn't really captured anybody's imagination. We had one option at the time, which was the commemorative flag. And so we hadn't really captured anybody's imagination. And I think it was, I don't know where I was when I came up with this idea, but one of my friends is the general manager of the Utah Jazz, and they have a large, community component. And I went and talked to them and said, "Hey, would you and your graphics team ever be interested in a boring summer project while you're done with, basketball and branding? Could you come up with some state flags?"
Yeah.
And it caught the imagination of he's one of my neighbors, actually works on the graphics team, but I didn't know a guy by the name of Ben Barnes. And Ben spent, I don't know how much time putting it together, but he came up with 60 different flags based on inspirational pieces from the current state flag. And those 60 flags, I then, and this is kind of part of the lore, but I kidnapped my colleagues, which at the time was the lieutenant governor.
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, yeah, I held them. I made sure they paid attention, but
Yeah.
I had the lieutenant governor. She was formerly a senator and served in the Senate with me at the time. And
Mhm.
she was one of the big, no way, we're not touching the flag. Just, it's dumb. Don't bother, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, interesting wrinkle.
And so she sits in this meeting we had in September, which is, like 4 or 5 months before Michael's presentation at Utah State. And she sits in this presentation, and it was 19 minutes of the Roman Mars video. I had them all watch that, and then we get done with that, and then a month later in November, we had the jazz guys come up and present literally their flag ideas, basically as a rebranding concept for the state. And now all of a sudden, everybody with the Roman Mars kind of concept, it was short enough, it was digestible enough, they could
Okay,
get
yeah.
the rules, they can get some of that stuff, and then we could shift in November to these concepts that really captured everybody's imagination. And didn't really, we were insistent that we not get down to one flag, that this be a commission, be an open process. But to Michael's point, Tara's point, like, if you don't have something visual to catch people's attention, you're not going to make it very far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like Erik, to that point, like it looks like you had something else to say at the last point, but also, I mean, just speaking to that, like you said, for example, you didn't have anything specific in mind, just like I want this to be better, something I can be proud of, etc. And then obviously these things do start to come up in whatever Dan said was 2018 with the commemorative flag, and I guess your brain's kind of been turning that direction for a while, but does that like kind of restart things a little bit, or?
As far as like the visual aidness of it,
Yes. Yeah.
um, actually, my barber in his shop, he had a big 4x6 version of the Centennial flag.
I will
And
say, like right now, just before we get into that, your barber earns his keep. Go on. Go on.
I'll give him a shout out. Look up Rocky Mountain Barber. Josh is awesome. And he had that up there, and so it kind of stayed top of mind, and I asked him, I'm like, hey, I like that you have the Centennial flag. I'm kind of interested in getting Utah a new flag. And he said, yeah, I've always wanted something to rep Utah pride, but the seal feels like government, and I'm not pro government. So, and I liked that. I'm like, people want something else. There's a lot of people who are speaking for the population of Utah and saying, actually, no, nobody wants this. But the silent majority, and I'm always humbled when I have conversations with my friends and we're like, we love the flag, it's the best thing ever. And the other side is, we hate this. This is literally the worst thing to ever happen to Utah. And about 98% of people in the middle are like, oh, that's a new flag? Oh, that's cool. Anyways.
Right.
Yeah. So it kind of makes me like check myself. But yeah, that I would say that Centennial flag, you really saw the train pick up speed at that point.
Right. And like Tara, I want to get to you next, but like really quickly for the folks that are like, so for Dan and Erik who are in Utah proper, um what you just touched on, Eric, did the commemorative flag did it like kind of ignite a fire, or I guess I'm trying to think of a good way to put this, but like, did it get a lot more people just interested in flags in general in Utah, and then get them by proxy of that looking at the old one and being like kind of scratching their heads, or do you see that as a turning point, I guess is a better way to put it?
Senator, do you want to go first?
Nope, it's all yours.
Okay. I will say
By the way, he gave me a hard time earlier today. He's like, what was the analogy you used, Eric? You said, what was your analogy?
Asking me and Dan McCay to be on the same show together is like asking Ben Affleck and the actual Batman to be on the same show. Like I can say, it's cool being Batman, but I'm like, you have the actual Dark Knight here, and so I'm all my stuff is just parenthetical.
Okay,
I love it.
I will say I saw more stickers, miniature flags, full-size flags of the commemorative flag in that short period of time than I ever saw people utilizing the old flag. Mm-hmm. And that really kind of confirmed to me, I'm like, people want to show something. I'm sick of seeing Colorado stickers on people's cars in Utah, and I'm like, we need something else. And now another dream has been accomplished. I have a trout outline because I'm a fisherman, a trout sticker with the Utah flag inside of it. And I'm like, you know what? Up yours, Colorado. We have a cool symbol now.
Yeah, I will admit that I do have one of those same trout stickers with the Colorado flag on it. But honestly, I'm not even a fisherman. I just really liked the way that it looked. And to your point, I'm sure if I go to Utah, I will just really like the way that looks as well, and probably buy it on a hat too. But
do the tips of the sea touch the white line? That's all I want to know.
The hat is like
Michael,
right behind me, but too far behind me to get.
You missed it. Just so you know, Governor Polis from Colorado did tweet about the new Utah flag in the Four Corners. I sent him a DM with your video about the seas closing. Oh, you kidding? I do what you tell me to. Oh yeah, he watched it. Okay,
yeah, no,
and he thumbs up. That's all I know.
He watched it before. I was in Colorado a few weeks ago, and he had tweeted something, and I sent him the video, and then he then tweeted without referencing me the whole thing, and I'm just like, you're trolling me at this point. But he hasn't sat down with me yet. But
okay,
they need to fix it anyway. Let's go back to Utah.
Yes. So, well, actually, funny enough, I was actually going to move briefly off Utah, but only like kind of piggybacking on what Eric and Dan were saying. So Tara, like, you are behind the Keystone flag, which, like, for those who don't know, is a better flag for Pennsylvania, and kind of spinning it into the Utah flag, which has that like beautiful like hexagon with the B in the middle of it, which is in some ways already used, like highway signs, things like that. It's a version of that. It's not the exact thing. But in Pennsylvania, like, the Keystone is everywhere. Like, already, you're not having to fight as hard to kind of get that in the popular imagination or the, whatever. Do you think that that's like helped, hindered, or do you think that that's just kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to put this, but do you think that may help you in future efforts to get it adopted? The fact that it's already out there?
Was that for me? I thought that was
Tara.
Tara.
That was for Tara.
Oh,
okay.
To me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
When it gets off, I assume somebody asked me a question. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that could have been to anybody, really.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, Tara, I just meant like the Keystone's already popular in the Keystone State, and I'm wondering if you can kind of like parlay that the same way that the Beehive has been.
I mean, it's a pretty obvious comparison to make, right?
Yeah, I'm not a journalist.
Yeah, well, journalists have actually tackled the subject of a new Pennsylvania flag in the past,
right.
Notably Keystone Newsroom, Spotlight PA. I was actually just looking this up, and over and over and over I see, just slap a Keystone on blue, done, easy. Gold keystone on blue, you got it. And it's like that is the imagery that people think of. You ask people to talk about the current flag, which I have hanging behind me. I don't know if people can see it on YouTube or not without me turning the angle a little bit.
I can see it on, yeah.
It winds up looking like, well, I don't know what you can see on that with if it's only hanging from a flagpole, you tell me. The thing is, that's the only thing that people ever seem to remember about this flag. Somebody on Twitter a couple of years ago posted up, said, without looking, describe the Keystone flag. And State Senator Tim Kearney responded with a tweet that was one word: horses, right? There's so much packed into that flag, and all of it does have meaning, and it remains in the seal. But yeah, I mean, it's the Keystone State. A keystone on the flag, whether it's weird and stretchy and oblong, or whether it's a tiny little seal on just blue, it's such an obvious symbol to go for. And I think I can't speak to this. I'll toss this one to Erik and Senator McCay, but just how much did having the beehive iconography already around you make adoption easier, right?
I'll be honest, it saved our bacon. I can honestly tell you, without the beehive iconography as part of our state talk, because I look at like Illinois, okay? Senator Doris Turner is working on a flag in Illinois, right? And I feel bad because what is Illinois' iconography, right? Mm-hmm. Other than like they kicked the Mormons out, so I guess we know that. I'm just kidding. Obviously, everything revolves around our history. But it's like this interesting story that they're trying to discover who they are or what their symbol is that's going to be their piece, and that is really, really hard to do in a way that is cohesive because it's a start over, right? The thing I love about the Keystone, and I do have I've thought about you a lot, Tara, and about like the issue for the Keystone because it broke my heart a little bit during the legislative process, just because, one, you have been so kind and so supportive throughout this whole process. And honestly, I love you for it. It has been so great for you to be so supportive. And just like when people were trolling one thing or another, you would jump in and say, well, couldn't you think of this? And I'd say, honestly, you've been fantastic. And the piece of my heart that broke a little bit was when we were working, getting down to the final designs, I kept throwing the commemorative flag into the conversation because I wanted people to be aware it is a very solid flag, right? And there were people that were complaining that because it's a St. George cross that goes, that makes the X, and as a result of that, it's like this callback to the Confederate flag. And I'm like, guys, that's not really what that's doing, but I get it. But you had people who were concerned because that argument or that discussion was going on about the Confederate flag while we were, it was kind of at its end when we were getting into ours. And so the commemorative flag came up while Mississippi was doing its thing, right? And getting rid of the Confederate flag. And so maybe that's the one little couch I can put in it. But every time I tried to put the commemorative flag into the conversation, it was clear from the design committee and from stakeholders that we weren't going there. And I don't know if it was the X question, if it was the Mississippi problem, I don't know if it was already present and therefore there was a bias against it. Or there's another thing that is a phenomena which is true, which is if you put together a commission of people and they just adopt what was there before, then what was the purpose of the commission, right? And so that's the fear I have for the Keystone flag because I love it. I've grown to really like what you've come up with. And it's my fear for that thing because I just know of those biases. I worry about if there's a commission organized. I think the greatest hope for the Keystone flag is, and you saw this happen with Minnesota as well, right? Minnesota, they organized a commission. The commission basically disrespected like the North, I can't remember what we called the North Star flag.
North Star flag.
Yeah, Lee Herald. And, and Lee called me like after, and I talked to Lee after the presentation of things. because I think he was saddened a little bit by the outcome, but he was quick to jump on board, just like you would be if Pennsylvania did the same thing. But there's just a little bit of mourning, and my heart broke a little bit when everybody was so dismissive of the commemorative flag during the design process. And then I saw Minnesota that if Pennsylvania did it, I just worry about that for your creation.
And Ted K was in touch with me like way back in late 2022, if I'm remembering this right. And I mean, we had talked about that exact issue. Like, you know, this is probably not going to be what makes it to the end. And I've had time to grapple with that already. And I'm like, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be. Let me ask you a question, though. Do you think
we don't need a moderator, Andy?
Do you think?
Yeah,
well, do you, Senator? Do you think? And maybe I'll pose this to Erik too. Do you think you'd be better off with the commemorative flag, or do you think you're better off with what you wound up getting overall?
Let's have Ben Affleck answer that first.
I would say it's hard to say hypothetically, but when we got to the idea of like when the bill passed to get a task force together to start talking about a new flag, crickets, when the public input design.
When, Erik, if you don't mind if I butt in there, like when was that during the timeline that you formed that? And
Senator, when did the task force bill get done?
2020. It was right before COVID. I know because I had to extend its authorization in November. So it was. So I remember I looked it up. Michael's screen. Mike, you spoke at Utah State in March of 2020. So it was literally right before the adoption of the bill, or days after. It was on either side of that. And then anyway, so that's the timing.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you too much there, Erik. But yeah,
no, you're
go
good.
On, because I'm very interested in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
However, when we got down to like finalists, then some people started to pay more attention, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't just like a fun project. This is like actual legislation. And that's when some people got, I don't know if nervous is the right word. Some people got upset that
exercised.
Yeah. And that's when the conversation like, oh, if something's changing, that must mean it's like Mississippi and they hate our flag because it's
okay.
There's something wrong with it.
That's the operative. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I had an argument with a guy who's on the other side of this issue here in Utah. And I'm like, you realize that we're not changing the flag in Utah because it's the Confederate flag, right? It's our seal. So we're doing another thing. And he said, no, it's actually erasure, and you're ashamed of our history.
Yeah, we've all talked to Chad. I get
it. It was as soon as that kind of caught fire amongst the like anti-communist, anti-Marxist.
Sure, crowd. Which I want to go into too, but there's so much to go into.
I've been called a degenerate Nazi and a communist more than I can count. Mm-hmm. Enemy of Utah, child of darkness. That was a good one.
Ooh, that's a good one.
But I called him that.
Nobody ever calls me that. It's so...
I've been called the progressive antichrist.
Yes. Yeah, everyone list your nicknames.
Oh, and all of us who like the flag are actually just Senator McCay's burner accounts.
Oh, right. That is a very popular theory, despite the fact that I've had like conversations with all of them, and they are clearly not Dan. Anyway.
So it's hard to say if the commemorative flag would have done that. It's kind of funny how I thought that a flag with a big religious symbol and red, white, and blue, I thought that'd be kind of innocuous, but unfortunately, a lot of people also misunderstand the bill and the legislation behind it, and they're like, "Oh, you erased the tribes," and I'm like, "Actually, no, we made that part even bigger." Then they're like, "Oh, you erased our pioneer heritage," and I'm like, "No, we made that part 3 times bigger."
Right.
So somebody said the comment, "All the symbolism on the old flag, you can find it on the new one." It's just done in a simpler way that is more attractive to use. And it's when they say, who's asking for this? And I'm like, a lot of people are asked for it by not using the current flag.
Right.
Wow.
That's,
Well
I
said.
think, something to really hone in on that's important, because it's the voting with your wallets, like to a T. It's
Right.
that exactly. I know not everyone trusts these studies that have come out and whatever, but I like to think that they're pretty accurate. Nobody really owned the old flag before. Now, granted, obviously a lot of people have been buying it up now that it's changing, but that's a literal reactionary thing. I mean, that, it just is. I wanted to, because like Michael's been not had a question in a minute. I wanted to ask Michael, specifically, like, as far as like these flag changes that go, or as far as these flag changes go, state by state, have you found any state a little bit easier to deal with, a little bit more difficult to deal with? You don't have to, mention names or any, well, state names, but like, do you think there's any process that's better necessarily than another? Because I know Maine is about to go on what we all assume is, I think, kind of a route to nowhere. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn there.
I don't know, man. So I'm glad you asked, because I was going to pose this kind of question to everybody else and take your job again. But
No, it's fine. Again, I don't need to be here.
We're all your pawns anyway.
Well, because I think I disagree. Well, I'm going to say something controversial, which is,
What?
par for the course.
You?
Yeah. But
All right.
I'm going to go out and say that design committees, like what happened in Utah, what happened in Minnesota, are the wrong way. Not the wrong way.
Yeah.
They're always going to get a mid flag because of what Dan had said. You're gonna have to compromise. You're gonna have to make somebody happy. You're gonna have to put a stupid date on it or whatever, and like you're not gonna get the perfect, because it's a committees are great at finding the average, finding the middle. And so if you do a design committee, you're gonna find the middle in terms of a good flag. You're not gonna get a keystone flag like we talked about.
Right.
And so in some ways, I'm totally, maybe this is completely against apparently what I've been called a communist and a Marxist, but I think there should be design dictatorships where you trust professionals to do their damn job and you trust vexillologists to do their job, and you I don't know. That's just me. It's never going to happen. And I know that because we live in America, and that's beautiful. And that's why I'll never be a politician like Dan, because I think I can look at compromise and go, you know what, that's actually worse. That's a worse design. And,
circling back to something we were talking about is the symbol of the beehive. I remember being in the design review committee meeting where somebody said, and maybe we don't even need a beehive on it. And like everything ground to a halt. and those of us who were kind of in the know were like, that's going to take our small chance and make it minuscule if we go that different and that unrecognizable.
Right.
And like with all the hate and judgment and false stuff we get about the beehive flag, I can only imagine what would have been behind something more abstract.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Because like the only few finalists that I remember, like to my memory, they were the arch. They kind of had like a pretty unique design element about it, I thought, about halfway through. And then most of them were beehive based. I can't think of one that wasn't arch or beehive based.
Right.
That made like the kind of final few. And it was clear to me, even as a non-Utahn, and just like looking at all those, I was like, they're gonna pick a beehive design. Yeah. It's just that, they couldn't say that or whatever.
And that's my biggest argument to the people who are trying to say that I had something to do with it. Like,
because
I would never have let someone put a big religious symbol in the middle of a flag. Like,
right.
But it's a beautiful flag, Dan. I'm sorry. I love it. It's great. But like, that is proof that I had nothing to do with this final design. Like, it's ridiculous.
Right. It's proof of that. And it's proof of like, not that I'm going to convince anyone right now, right here, but a Marxist leftist flag would not have any kind of religious symbol on it. I think I'm pretty comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
And
let
we
me
got
let me
Passed by
Casper.
the
let me
Utah
jump in there.
legislature.
This one gets
I know.
confused. And yeah, let it go.
I'll jump in there just real quickly and say, like, I know that people look at the beehive and say it's like religious per se, right? And I
Mhm.
get
Okay.
that historical significance. Whether we like it or not, like how this state came about and became like a state with, in the midst of Western expansion, in the midst of all the things, and we don't really have to comment on like the social issues as a result of it. But
Mhm.
look, they came when the Mormon LDS pioneers came to Utah and declared that this is the right place. It became the beehive state after Brigham Young and several others liked the productivity component of it. The hard part is if you take away the beehive, we have some geography components maybe to your point about the arch. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the Illinois problem. I mean, if you took away the beehive, you have an Illinois problem, and then I think you have an even bigger issue trying to bring everybody else along, which kind of gets down to to the root of Andy and really Michael's point, and I have to agree with him. Unfortunately, he's right. um, the commission, like having a commission and designing things by committee is really hard to do. I would say, could the result have been better? Probably. Like if I just said designers go make us something, go for it, and we'll tell you like when you get there. My problem is that's still designed by committee, and with less angels. And the problem really becomes, how can you check in with the people and check in with the designers so that they're together and like have a final design? It's really, really hard is all I can tell you. Because we looked at, I mean, Erik was there. We looked at, in our final design meetings, we looked at removing the entire background really, which is a blue, it's the blue background, the white mountains and the red rocks. We looked at removing that altogether and just having a navy blue flag with the beehive seal, and putting those there and letting that be what kind of commands it. And the problem we ran into was there were plenty of people who said, we just went from a blue flag with a seal in the middle of it to a blue flag with a blue flag with a seal in the middle of it. And so it was boring, right? And so people were like, so
Yeah.
really we just met so that we can make the beehive larger. That seems like a lot of time and effort to make the beehive bigger. And
Right.
that's kind of how we get the background, so to speak, because it makes it interesting, I guess. I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you
I
start.
think you
Okay.
did the right thing by going to the designer of the Utah Jazz and saying like you started it the right way, and I think face the reality that people have to be involved, unfortunately. And I say that with all love to people because
Right.
like
Yeah.
here's two humans that are terrible human beings, but I will bring up in a good light. Steve Jobs always said the customer wants what I tell them that they want, because Henry Ford, another terrible human, was like, if you ask them what they want, they will say a faster horse carriage. The people will not think of the next thing. Designers will think about it, and then they will show them this is better, right? That's what designers do. And if you ask the people what they want, they're gonna get it wrong, unfortunately. And that's just the power of the masses. So
Yeah.
Right.
anyway.
No, I mean that's why I asked about the whole like main issue in Illinois and like every other state that's one of the Dakotas, South Dakota, I think, is thinking of it. And like I mean, Dan, like we've had a lot from you, but like is there anything that you would change about the process, like or I guess a better way of asking it is what would you recommend to another state that is about to go through a similar thing?
Man, that is it's a long list, but
You
it
had to know
it
I was going to
depends.
ask that
Yeah,
one though.
it depends because you asked earlier, are there some states that have an easier path, or is there a type, or those kinds of things?
Right.
I talked to Minnesota, I've talked to Illinois, and it's funny. but I think their process is easier
Okay.
because they're a Democrat controlled legislature, and I don't want to make this like a partisan thing, but
Sure.
Democrats tend to be more on the progress or progressive side of things. Let's change everything, throw everything out, right? Which can be dangerous in and of itself if they lose a portion of their population. Because believe it or not, as we saw with polling, there were a third that really cared about the old flag. There were a third that were indifferent, and then there were a third that really wanted a new flag. And what we've found is that if you have the wrong symbols on your flag, that third that is indifferent will flip on you quick.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
and
I see
that's
where you're.
the and that's the concern. But if you look at the process side of things, and I'd say the easier side of things, one lesson I remembered is, we turned over that we were the first, really, I guess, outside of Mississippi, which kind of changed its flag for different cultural reasons.
Overnight almost. Yeah.
Yeah, but ours was a different question. It was, hey, the design could be better, right? It's
Mhm.
not about getting rid of our past. It's not about denying all these other things. It's how do we, and so attacking things and convincing people that a design can be better is really, really hard also. And
Yeah.
so trying to walk that fine line of making sure that you get the right people on the committee, because I don't know how you do this without a committee. We ended up, originally Representative Handy had a smattering of people from all over the different stakeholders and communities and that kind of stuff. And we eventually, after a bunch of conversations, just eliminated everybody from the outside and just said, this is going to come down to a legislative vote.
Hmm.
And if it's going to come down to a legislative vote, if you don't have enough legislators on the committee, then you're gonna run into trouble. And so I would say one thing I didn't do well is I thought I want a legislative committee, but I don't want it too big. So we had 3 and 3, and then the governor and lieutenant governor on the committee. In hindsight, I should have had more legislators and even some dissenters potentially on there, which is what Minnesota did. They got a minority report out of there. So I would say the makeup of the committee is super important, and making sure that you're getting lots of different people's opinions. That's one big lesson that I think someone should really think about as they're putting this together.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Erik, I was going to ask you. So, as far as the flag has already been pushed through, everything like that, and there are these signature gathering things that we've talked about on and on, like not on here, but on Twitter elsewhere. Um, and you were asked to say, well, I don't know if you were asked. You can tell me, but you sat on the pro side, basically, of the change, and you can probably put it better than that. But and had to kind of speak in front of the board and say, well, these are the reasons that I believe this should go through. I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's the like I guess like I want to really know where your head's at, like when you get asked to do that, when you're preparing yourself to do that. I've never spoken in front of a committee other than of my peers on a joke, so I'd love to hear like kind of like what goes like did you coordinate with other, well, tell me as much as you want to, but I do wonder if there's a multi-pronged attack or like kind of where your head's at going in.
I'm gonna disappoint you and
Tracy and Chad.
a lot of my enemies.
Sorry.
There's very little deep-seated corruption and coordination on this part. Whenever there was a committee and I could make it, I didn't get to all of them.
Okay.
But yeah, my strategy was just to the not be like, you better change the flag or else I hate you.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's like, hey, we're keeping the seal. And even the governor signed an executive order to keep the historic flag flying at the Capitol. This is just a chance for something else. And like to that point, and Senator McCay can vouch for this, we made this lapel pin, and uh, it's been the most popular thing that we've ever given out. And I'm giving out 50 more to a group that asked for them. And it's just, there's not a lot of like people like me or people on the other side that are vocal and are going to attend committees about this thing. But
Right.
most people just, they see it and they're like, huh, that's cool. And especially when I tell them, if they prefer the old flag, I'm like, actually, we're keeping that. It's still in code, and the seal, which it's based on, is still the same. Even people who signed the referendum, I kind of told that to. I'm like, just so you know, we are keeping the old flag. We're keeping the seal. This is just something in addition. And they're like, oh, then I'm actually okay with that. So I just kind of wanted to speak the truth and kind of get all points of view out there.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, like, honestly, like, that was going to be my next question to you was, like, had you, and you covered it, but, like, spoken to any people on that had signed it that maybe, well, maybe there's not a good way to ask this that doesn't sound kind of whatever, but that seemed maybe they were a little bit misled by the question or kind of agreed with you more than you would have thought?
Yeah, I don't take issue with anybody who prefers the
Sure.
old flag and the historic flag. I do take issue when someone says about me that I'm like a progressive insurgent, and that I have money vested in this.
When it's ad hominem like that. And if anybody is a progressive insurgent that has money in this, never mind, Michael. I did have a few. I did have before we.
I will be. I want to start making those pins though, Eric. If you want to send me that file, because I can make some for you.
Yeah, I'd love a beehive flag pin that also says progressive insurgent at the bottom. But I did have a few, like, if you guys have a little bit of time, I had a couple questions from Instagram here. Literally just a couple. I think we've kind of covered this one, but this is kind of more pointed toward Dan. Are your constituents happy with the redesign? And was there any major criticism? I think we've been over a lot of the criticisms, but have you talked to kind of like people, people on the streets kind of thing that have pretty strong opinions either direction?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've gotten it from different directions. On one occasion, I was, in our church congregation, we all speak on occasion, and they rarely do I ever get asked to speak on anything political, but this year I got to speak on like the Constitution, and I talked about, everybody talks about why, the Constitution answers all questions. I'm like, well, not really, because I believe that the Constitution was really a founding document that was intended for us to fight for the rest of our lives about, our republic and that kind of thing. And anyways, I was talking about that, and this person came up to me after I'd given this talk and said, "Oh, what you said, that was so perfect. Thank you. That's exactly, they were obviously coming at it from the right political persuasion. And that was perfect. Just what I wanted to hear. Thank you, thank you, thank you." It's like, oh, now if only you could talk sense to these people that are bringing the new flag. And I said,
don't know who you are.
Clearly. And so I was like, so, tell me about this new flag thing. And they started to recount all the conspiracy theories about Michael Green and some guy from Ohio taking over the process. And we just did his bidding. And
Ohio, famous.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And so, trust me, he's been from Russia as well. So, it's Michael's really. He's a figure. He's a figure that will be ignominious, certainly in Utah's history. But it's funny that this person was kind of into me. Yeah, but it just shows you like there was such a juxtaposed conversation to watch it shift, and this person be so anti-flag but agree with me on something, and I heard that from a few people, but for the most part, like the people around me, I mean, when I was getting discouraged about the flag or discouraged about adoption or any of those other things, you want to know who gave me the most hope of this whole process? Is my 11 and 9-year-old daughters, both of them. And they were just so emphatic and so excited. I mean, they were drawing stuff. I mean, I could show you, they get a school project.
So they were doing one of the things that good flags do.
They're doing school projects to paint a rock. And my 11-year-old likes the red background, and the 9-year-old wanted an orange background. And so there's always this internal thing. But that's that's what my house
Should've
became,
gone
and
orange.
I knew I had to get this done. And
Right.
so, long story short, it was, I get it from all sides, but for the most part, I would say it's 70% positive and 30% negative, at least when I'm just people on the street, and most people that are just like, I do not understand why this is such a thing, and people signed the initiative or the referendum because it was a really easy conversation point, which is, hey, just let us vote, which is really interesting for me to hear, people of the right persuasion, Republican or whatever, arguing for popular democracy, which is not traditionally,
Right.
where they came from or where that Republican
I was
Party
going to say, if
element
you
came
want to
from.
take the strict definition of Republican, yes, right. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to watch the mental gymnastics people have to go through to convince themselves of one point or another. I get it. Flags. What I learned, and I did not fully appreciate this, when I met Ted K the first time. He came into town to have some design meetings, and I just wanted to pick his brain. So I decided to take him out and get an ice cream and just kind of pick his brain on a bunch of stuff. And we're sitting there eating ice cream and talking about
That's so
flags and
Utah, by the way. Sorry.
so Utah. Yeah, I'm
Go on.
not sure, by the way, that it's legal to fly the cold beer flag close to the Utah flag. By the way, I'm pretty sure there's rules.
Well, we'll just now it's old beer.
It's old beer.
I don't know
Yeah,
if that
that
makes it
flat beer
better
is
or
probably
worse.
fine. But I sat with Ted, and I did not fully appreciate at the time, because we were getting ready to announce, like, here's our finalists and here's our 6 designs that are going to be the end and that kind of
Right.
thing. And he said something that has just captured my mind so many times late at night. And his response was, he's like, I don't know that you realize how political this is going to get. And I said, what do you mean? And he began to just tell me that people, whether they admit it or not, they really care about their flag and they really care about flags. And if you ask people, they're going to tell you it's the least important thing. And then they're going to spend an hour telling you why it's the least important thing. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had like that, where somebody said, why doesn't the legislature something more important? And then
Oh,
proceed to tell me an hour into this conversation, I would literally turn to him and say, you realize this is not important, but we've spent an hour on this. And then they stop and they think, maybe it is more important than I realize. And that's something, just Ted gave me that, and I reflect on it on all the time, just on how important flags are. But it's something
yeah.
that legitimately is important to all of us, because I don't know, maybe I don't know. I'm not sure where everybody's political persuasions are, but I'm probably the only Republican potentially on this call or on our podcast here. Oh, we got Erik. Okay. I don't want to judge, right? But I at the end of the day, I'm probably one of the only ones. But yet, this is one topic we can all sit in a room and debate over design and their
Yeah.
meanings and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And this was a world that was completely unknown to me
Right.
5-6 years ago.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's been good having you in the game, despite the actual political things that admittedly we do strongly disagree on. But yeah, I think we can appreciate, like I
But
said, the
I don't even agree politically with the people sitting at my Thanksgiving table, Andy. I don't know why we would ever
sure,
expect
yeah,
all of us to agree on something, right?
we briefly talked about that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, and we don't have to. And I think like this is to the credit of that, is that we can agree, as you said, on this. If nothing else, and I'm sure there are a few other things, but like if nothing else, we can agree on this. And it doesn't matter like who brings it up, who whatever. Like, yeah, I'm gonna lose myself if I keep talking about it. I did want to ask Erik one more question, at least one more question, but from somebody who's been kind of on the sidelines, but also very much in the mix as well. Maybe not politically, but again, sidelines. What's kind of your favorite part of this process, if I can? Like, what's been the thing that's kind of given you the most joy or the most maybe surprise?
I'll do two quick, and one segues just what we were just talking about.
Sure.
The design review committee, I could go and say, like, that person is scary conservative. That person is frighteningly progressive, even for me, who's a little more on the moderate side. That room was filled with various viewpoints, and I appreciated that. It wasn't one kind of perspective.
Right. It's not a monolith.
Yeah. And then the other thing is actually an image, and if I can find it, I'll send it to you, and maybe you can share it on Instagram. But it's a grid of images, 10 wide, 7 down, of flags that feature a mountain background and a beehive, and some nod to red rocks.
Right.
And it's just so cool, and kind of, it's kismet, it's spiritual, that everyone kind of knew that this was what Utah was going to look like. They were going to have a beehive. We wanted to acknowledge the greatest snow on earth. We wanted to some acknowledgement of southern Utah and their red rock. It's awesome to see how many designs in that committee had mountains and beehives. Yeah. It's just, that's
okay.
That's even more than mine was. Yeah,
okay.
And
I use this all the time.
Yeah, it's just it was meant to be. That image kind of shows me, I'm like, this, even though it's not the best design, it's the most Utah design.
And I feel bad because I just realized Michael's not on this, but he should, but anyway.
You can leave me off. Please, I would love to be out of the Utah discussion for the rest of my life. I don't know if I can travel there safely at this point.
My next question was going to be to you. Do you want to talk any on that, or is it better just kind of left unsaid?
No, I think it just echoes what Dan was saying. Like, it's crazy that people care this much. I mean, when I do stuff, the only threats that I've had at Flags for Good, which is a company that is built to piss off half the people in this country, right? The only threats I've had have been on state flags, like not the Black Lives Matter stuff, not any of the Pride stuff. Yeah. Like, it's truly the state stuff, and like, that's just nuts. And constantly fascinated by flags, and just very cool. It's been cool to meet Erik and Dan through this, and get to know Tara through this tangentially, and that came out of it, at least, right? And of course, a new flag for a beautiful state, which I love and would love to call myself a Utahn one day, and get some more of that best snow on earth.
Yeah, right on, man. Like, I just kind of like piggybacking off of that. I'm wondering, obviously your Utah redesign got the most, probably, I think safe to say, the most traction, and indirectly, in a sense, led to this, but like, or maybe directly. Well, we can debate that.
I would honestly say not. Like, it sounds like from all the timelines that they've been saying, like, this was happening outside of what I was doing, and things just kind of coincided at the same time.
Yeah, they did say that.
But I will say this. I love that Michael, an outsider who'd been to Utah, he knew enough about Utah and knew enough about like who we were, that literally he came up with a flag that was really close. It's very well done. And the only thing he left out is something that he just underappreciates about our culture, which is how important the beehive is. And, if you look at that, I'd say, while there was no cause and effect, but I can honestly say it is hard to not appreciate what Michael came up with and see it and say, I get it. And the one thing, and I'll just, because this came up, the one thing, Michael said it earlier online, which I really appreciate, because people just don't get it. Like, Michael and I never really talked until the final design was out. And the funny thing is, and I can say this, I reached out to him because one, I'd seen the billboard like during the legislative session, was like, oh, that's cool. But it quickly was bleached from my mind as I'm dealing with 7,000 designs and trying to figure stuff out that way. But it wasn't until like we had a final design, and we pull it up, and we're getting ready to print out some test copies and all this other stuff. And one of the designers says, that looks a little bit like this other flag. And that literally, that's how it came up. And I'm like, oh wow, that's kind of cool. And so I direct messaged Michael on Twitter and said, hey, you have a second? And so I called him, and I had just gotten off of a vacation, and I called Michael and I said, dude, your design is really close, and I just want to say thank you for caring and like thinking it was awesome. And we have a bunch of other designs that were certainly part of it as well. And there was a conversation whether or not, and Michael, you'll laugh at this, there was a conversation as to whether or not like we should allow out of staters to win. Is when they had like the winning thing, and I said absolutely not. No, and Michael probably wishes I would have said yes, because then it would have saved him a bunch of heartache and sorrow, probably. But I said absolutely not. Like, our rules did not say you couldn't submit or you couldn't win or we couldn't appreciate your art if you're from out of state. We also didn't, in our design criteria, we did not ask anybody's party affiliation. We didn't ask anybody how they felt about a specific issue or another. That was never part of it, because it's what this crowd appreciates probably more than anybody else, is that maybe you could disagree on 1,000 other things, but like we could all get in the room and we could fight about a state flag, or we could fight about a design, and we can appreciably come together on a good design or whatever it may be that has nothing to do with our politics, has nothing to do with our background. And I feel like, and I mean this in its truest sense, I know Michael probably has some regrets. He'll get over it. I have. But I'm really glad that people like Michael were interested in the process and jumped in. I mean, I wish, like anything, we could have done away with the conspiracy parts of it and all this other stuff. Sure. But I'm really glad that there are people like Michael who love Utah, wanted to participate, and wants to like say something positive about our state. Like, I love all of that. And the more I can get of that, the better. And I know maybe being, I've been an over-includer in my life anyways, but maybe being over-inclusive that way of just saying, hey, all ideas and we'll pick the best of those. I don't ever feel like the government or society or anything else is any worse off because we take that approach. So thank you, Michael, despite the pain that has come as a result of dabbling, I guess, in that world. I appreciate you and others there were other people from out of state who also submitted. We had people as far as Slovenia, and Turkey, and like sending us designs. That's which is awesome. Yeah. So anyway,
no, sorry, finish up if you had one.
I say, if I'm going to get burned down politically for having associated with people like Tara and Michael and Andy, or no one's going to give me a hard time about Erik. Everybody loves that guy. But if someone's going to burn me down for an association, like, I can't pick better people to like associate with. And I'm all in. Like, if people want to have a different opinion, I value that. I love it. And I love the value of the arena, so to speak, of ideas. And so let's fight about our ideas. Let's make America better by fighting. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think that fight is absolutely essential to who we are. And maybe flags is just a microcosm of it, but I really want us to continue fighting. And I don't want anybody to check out of the debate because they don't agree with something or that kind of thing. Like, let's keep fighting. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, well said. And to that point, I think it's incredibly invaluable to have out-of-staters at least weigh in, if not, submit their own design, like whatever. This is maybe a special case, but like, I think what out-of-staters see in your state is incredibly valuable. What out-of-staters see in East Tennessee, for example, like, they come here, they're like, the mountains are unlike anything I've known. And I just like it sticks in their head. Same thing with Utah. It's like the snow that you're talking about. It's like, if you're from there, you start to, not in every case, but a lot of times you can take things for granted. Whereas if you come from somewhere else and you see like the natural beauty that's in Utah or in Tennessee or wherever, it sticks with you. And I think it's vitally important that we have both the local views and the out-of-state views kind of coming together on that design. And that's my piece. And I'm going to go back to being a moderator because I
No,
I did have one more question for. Oh shoot.
Michael I want to hear from Michael had a
Okay,
thought real
yeah,
quick
no,
here.
Michael, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I just wanted to echo what you're saying because you're so right. Like a flag is a piece of design. And when you talk about designing a logo or something, you have to think about your audience. And a lot of times a
Yeah,
flag has an internal and an external audience. And to say that somebody who doesn't live here can't design our flag, that's like, oh well, you can only use internal employees to design a company logo. That's ridiculous, right? Like people have a experience and a training to do something like that. Like the father of vexillology, Whitney Smith, designed the flag for Guyana, right, in South America, right? Like you can be a flag designer, but shit, where was your point? Where was the point going? Oh, thinking of flags like brands, I mean, they truly are the brand of that place. And I think it's good to think of them like that and treat them like that. Because in the end, that is the logo in which someone will remember Tennessee,
right.
right?
It's also where you get the pushback is the thing, as I'm sure like you guys and Erik, and Tara, like all four of you have definitely dealt with much more than
Well,
I
and
have.
I would add to Michael's point, just underlining, right? I love, when people would come at me with, oh, you can't mess up our sacred seal. I say, well, our
This
seal
was a
was
question.
designed
I'm glad you're addressing it. Yeah.
our seal was designed by a gentleman from Edmonton, Canada, who moved here to work on the railroads, and he was a part-timer in a bar
Wait,
that
all the
was
live long day?
for all the live long day.
Okay,
And he
sorry,
was a
go on.
part timer working as a bartender, and he also knew metal work. Like pioneers knew how to. I mean, people who came here and came from all over the place, they knew stuff, and like just had all these. Like this guy knew how to do metal artwork, and so he came up with the state seal because we needed one in 1895 because it was literally the very first bill that the legislature adopted was adopting a state seal.
Yeah,
And so this guy from Edmonton, Canada, had moved here in 1893. He designs the seal in 1895. He moves away to California in 1897. This guy was
yeah,
not from Utah. The Utah State Capitol was designed by Richard Cletting. Richard Cletting was an architect who did live in Utah at the time, but he grew up and his architectural days were in Germany and in pre-war Europe. And he was the one who really designed and brought the Utah State Capitol to life from its design. And he's the one who incorporated the beehive and the hexagon throughout our state capitol. And so, to your point, outsiders do bring an important perspective of how we're viewed or the things that are important. And it also gives us a great sense of who we are and also can tell us how we can do it better, right? We learned a lot from Mitt Romney running for presidential candidate, right? He became the Republican nominee and people said all kinds of stuff and it was crazy to us. Like you look at the Bible Belt, which includes, your town, Andy, Tennessee, but you look at the Bible Belt area, and Mitt Romney polled really poorly in the beginning in Tennessee. Eventually won Tennessee, but poll questions and poll comments said a lot. Learned a lot, really, that old biases or old thoughts about who LDS or Mormon people were still held true in a lot of those places. And there were things that you're like, well, I guess we get to learn a lot about ourselves and how we can pivot from that point to tell our story better or tell who we are differently. And if we don't like it, if we don't like what other people are saying, then I think one of the best things we can do is try and shape tell our story better. And that's an invitation in some ways more than it is condemnation. But hey.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And like kind of again piggybacking like back up that point, like Tara, to rope you back in here, like the Keystone flag itself was designed by you, a longtime Pennsylvanian, but when you designed it, or maybe before I don't know the timeline here, um, but when you started talking to Michael, like it became apparent that Michael had designed a very similar flag with a keystone in the middle and two stars for the second state to join the Union. So it's very interesting that both a longtime Pennsylvanian and someone who's been there but not from there came up with such a similar design, and I think that speaks to pretty much the point that we've been going around on here. did that like did that surprise you? Are there any other like keystone designs that you've been like, oh wait, did you crib for me or did I crib for like?
Oh yeah, no, somebody actually came to me. I think this was in late 2022 when the Keystone Flag Kickstarter was taking off. He said, "Hey, I think this Flags for Good guy ripped off your design."
Okay, interesting.
But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. We've talked. Michael had no idea, right?
Right.
If you want to go in the other, I designed this in almost its current form in 2017, but Michael had
Yeah.
never seen it. If you want to take the story backwards in the other direction, there's another flag that was designed in 2012 that was then entered into a Reddit competition for new state flags that also looks almost exactly like the Keystone flag in blue,
Yeah.
white, and gold, stolen from the license plate. I think the license plate is an interesting thing to take your flag colors from, but sure, let's
Yes.
make a Visa logo flag. Why not?
When-
But just the idea that, when you look at these forms of people who have designed these flags, and so many of them hit on so many similar subjects. Senator and Erik, both of you were talking about how many designs looked so similar, with the beehive, with the red rocks, with the blue skies, with the white mountains. And over, I see a couple of recurring themes with Pennsylvania flags. I see keystones, some small, some stretching the whole way. I see many with blue and gold, some with red, some with green. I see a bunch that try to incorporate William Penn's coat of arms. But over and over, these common themes keep popping up, and I think being able to see all of those and distilling what is best here, right? I think the fact that so many different people can independently, without seeing each other's work, come to the same idea can speak to the value of an idea, and can speak to the power of what symbols just occur naturally.
And I think that is probably the way I would say a new state should do that, is like let it come organically. Like Maine, which flag do they use up there? They use the old flag. So just choose between the one that's already there and the old one. Milwaukee, they have a flag that all the people use. You don't need a design committee. Just choose between the thing that's already in use, the thing that just continues to come up and come up and come up, and the old, right? Maybe that's the best way to do it, is let it over time design itself.
And that's
Right.
been one of my philosophies too with this is, I've looked at this as kind of a people's flag, as you've mentioned, right? Even if it's not the symbol of a government, that's fine. There are a lot of people who would prefer the government are nowhere near their lives, right? There are a lot of people who, even the people who want more government are like, oh, but in this aspect of my life, you stay off, right? And so, it's I'm trying to remember where I started with this to where I was going here. But just here we go. So just thinking about how, the Keystone flag has kind of taken off as a people's flag. Flags for Good is not the only group making the Keystone flag. Kiwi Vexart has made it. I've talked to a couple other people about independent production. I'm thinking about other pins and patches that have come out. Those aren't coming from Flags for Good, right? This is something that is taking off in an organic sense. It doesn't have to be the flag of a government if the people agree, just through common consensus. Yeah, this is what it is. We've already got it. My dream is someday people go, wait, that's not the state flag.
That's cool.
So.
Yeah. Well, shoot, this might be a good time to wind down unless anyone has any closing remarks. Erik, it's been I think you've been the longest since. If you had anything to maybe kind of close us out with on your end.
I saw in the
or
chat.
Any lingering thoughts?
I saw in the chat Tara brought up kind of we have the two
flag
flag solution here
Yes.
in Utah.
My bad, I meant to ask that.
I was actually at the Capitol today, and they have in front, we have the American flag and the new Utah flag. However, on top of the building, we have an American flag and the historic flag.
Right.
And I feel like when we said, no, we're keeping the old flag, people didn't believe that. And so I appreciated that as kind of like a show of good faith. We're like, see, it's not about like trashing history. It's not a Mississippi situation. It's just
Despite the
we're
fact, did you see that RUF cropped it out of the image that they posted on Twitter?
I didn't I
They
was not
cropped it
aware
out of
of
the image
that.
they posted on Twitter because they have to fit that narrative. But I mean, you're correct, and please continue.
Yeah, and so as far as the two state, there may two flag two state solution. That's a different that's a different conversation. Um, as far as two flags go, maybe there's a day when one like becomes more popular than the other, but until then, it's kind of like free market, and it's to the people that say like, well, we should vote on which one. I'm like, well, you don't. The way we vote now is everyone can fly what they want, and
Yeah.
then we'll just kind of like see what happens. But to those, like I think I shared on Twitter like a study that said like the older you are, the more you prefer the old flag. And to those people,
Yeah.
it's still codified. It is still a flag of Utah. So go ahead,
Great.
like knock yourself out. I love the new one, but I respect somebody who likes the old one, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
Can this will be an interesting aside. Again, I there's just lessons, right? There's all these lessons, and
Yeah.
the one thing you bring up the two flag solution, Tara, and it reminds me of one of my lessons, right? It's like beware of compromise, and I know that's maybe a loaded. That's something Michael would say up front, because it's very controversial. Um, but beware of compromise. And the reason I say that is unless you have a defined group to compromise with, if you compromise once over the lengthy process, that compromise may not be effective to keep the next group that pops up afterwards to keep them on board. And so the two flag solution came up in November of 2020 when we'd heard in the first bill that we could set up a task force, and we said we'll consider ideas. We were looking at maybe the governor's flag. We're trying to figure out how we memorialize and keep the historic state flag.
Yeah.
And legislators and others who came and complained about the process, we said, look, we came up with this where we weren't going to do away with the historic state flag. We were just going to, give it a different role. And we actually have a history of doing that in Utah. We have an old state hymn that was adopted in the early 1900s, and it's extremely complicated, hard to play, and hard to sing. It's not playable on my guitar. So like things that like you just can't do. And so we came up with a new state song that was easy for kids to sing, easy to play. And so we created a state hymn, and we moved the other song that was more complicated, made it the state hymn, and then we have the state song, which then replaced it. So that was kind of the model we were looking at. We adopted that compromise with everybody else kind of on board, we thought.
Good. Did not know that.
And then along comes, like, after we have the final design, up comes a new group of people who are mad and frustrated and, ready to burn the place down. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we had compromised so early that there was nothing left to compromise other than just say, hey, this is one guy said, hey, let's just make that new logo the state shield instead of like the state flag, which was absolutely ridiculous. But that was his idea. And then others were like, well, let's just not adopt it, and we'll just start flying it at the Capitol. I'm like, that won't work either, because you got to have something that's not confusing to the rest of the world. And so that was an interesting lesson in compromise for me in the legislative process, was just trying to figure out when you compromise and make sure that when you compromise that it's enough to get everybody there. And I'm afraid, the two flag solution, I love it. I think it's distinctive. I think it's, it makes us unique a little bit. And it does tell the story that we do still like our state seal. We haven't thrown it out. And so having that be a component of that conversation as well but there are some who are just convinced that our whole goal, our whole absolute deal here is to get rid of the seal from the guy from Edmonton, and get rid of his work. And that was not our attempt. That was not our goal. And it's just hard to tell the story any other way. And that's one of the other lessons is lies spread so much easier than the truth. And it's really unfortunate. It happens. It doesn't matter your political persuasion one way or the other, but lies spreads. They're so much easier. They're so much more convenient, and they're just quicker to spread. It's easier to otherize somebody based on one thing you've heard, and that's exactly what happens in this process on several occasions. Was just they decided it was a Michael Green conspiracy. And I'm working with all these outside people, and they're leftist lobbyists who are taking over the state of Utah. And that isn't what had happened at all. It was really just an organic thing that the people grew into, and the lie spread so much faster than I could actually ever tell the truth. And everybody's like, "Well, you should have told more." I said, "Well, I tried, but we spent $500,000." And on the rebrand or on the flag design process, and most of that was public opinion gathering. I mean,
Right.
2/3 of that was gathering public opinion.
Can I throw in there that is a shockingly low number if you really get down to it? Anyway, considering everything.
But we could have spent a lot more, right? We could have spent a lot more in social media and advertising, all that other stuff. We didn't because we were sensitive to the budget.
Right,
so.
Right. Which was the argument against you. Which
billboards are really cheap, though.
Yeah, you handled every argument against you with aplomb. So and yet they don't stop. So.
But I would say the two flag, to answer Tara's question, I do think the two flag solution is helpful in our case, where we're not. I wouldn't recommend it for Mississippi. Mississippi had a totally different motivation for why they were doing what they were doing, right? And their motivation, if you talk to the Speaker of the House, Phil Gunn in Mississippi, I've had a lengthy conversation with Phil about how they got where they did, how they got the votes, all the community and church leaders that got involved. Like, it was amazing to hear their story. I would say, Andy, that's another conversation worth having on your podcast.
Sure.
But their process was a totally different element, and how it happened and how it failed and how it then succeeded.
Right.
Totally different story. Ours was where we want to make sure that we respect and honor our heritage and adopt something that could be more easily recognizable for design purposes. And so when you have that, I think the two flag solution can work. And that's, I guess that's really all I could say about that.
Yeah, no, I'll thank you again at the end, but yeah, thanks for being here and thanks for that. Michael, did you want to have any closing remarks of your own?
No.
Okay, cool. So Tara. No,
His
Michael.
light has gone from the light has gone from his room, and now it's in mine.
I was gonna say, yeah, the sun is literally, we can track it basically by both of your cameras.
Because I'll say something controversial again. The Earth is round, so that is why that's happening.
I can put up with a lot on this show, but okay, dude, I guess if you say so. But no, I would love a closing from you if you have anything separate to add or anything, or if not, we can move on.
No, I think I've said this to Dan personally, but I mean, congratulations. You've done something that I did not think was possible. And that's one of the reasons I did my project, because I was like, there's no way a state, a city, any politician would take up this charge, because it is a lose-lose situation. Like, you're gonna piss people off. And so, yeah, you did it, and it's amazing, and hopefully is a model for a lot of states to come. And hopefully we see a lot more better flags out there. And some people will say that there's no point, like it's just whatever. But I think, in 50 years, there'll be a lot of people who will have, state pride, because now they have a symbol to attribute how they feel to their state. So, or cities or whatever, I think this will be a model for a lot of states to come. So congrats. You did it. And cheers to you with a non-alcoholic beer, I guess.
Cheers to you with an alcoholic beer, but also, yeah, I mean, well, just to, I think I've used the word piggyback more today than I ever have with like any of my cousins, but or nieces or nephews, really. But to piggyback on that, like I am so excited for Utah to get that, like not just the beehive. The beehive is, like a little bit pervasive, but like or already pervasive in a good way. But the beehive with the hex, like I cannot wait for you guys to get that everywhere, because the amount of times I see the TriStar, like the Tennessee TriStar around here, it 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 brings out the state pride that I otherwise don't normally have. As like you guys have touched on, I mean, we haven't really gone too much into politics, but I am a lot more left. But I still, which makes me like not automatically associate with the South in every sense. I do love the cooking, though. I will say that. Uh, but seeing that TriStar, it brings me right back as a Tennessee boy, like regardless of my thoughts on like anything else. And I can only imagine it's going to be the same with the Beehive. It already is the same with the Keystone, which we'll touch on. And yeah, I could not be happier for you guys. But Tara, do you want to kind of close us out with a little bit of, a little bit of whatever you got?
I guess just coming from somebody who's seeing the very early stages of this in Pennsylvania, and I mean the earliest of stages, it has been an honor and a joy to watch this process from the outside and to be able to talk to some people on the inside too. It's an honor, joy, and a privilege, honestly. Just knowing that it is possible to change a flag for pure design reasons, right? Not to get rid of something bad, but to have something good. I'm watching so many parallels. I'm watching the introduction of bills that fail and then fail again. HR 163 has yet to get a committee assignment nearly a year later, right? But I'm watching, the Keystone flag go up the way the commemorative flag did. I'm seeing the introduction of that bill suddenly bringing a resurgence. Years. I've lived a couple blocks from the Capitol. I've gone in through. I had never seen a Pennsylvania flag in the gift shop until HR 163. I had never seen a Pennsylvania flag hanging from the rafters the way they do in Colorado until HR 163. By the way, to anybody listening, House Resolution 163, call your representatives and state senators here in Pennsylvania. It doesn't have to be the Keystone flag, but if you're here, you probably want a better flag for Pennsylvania. You should tell them that you do. You should be clear about that because they need to hear that support. Not only that, but seeing folks defend themselves from slings and arrows and having an idea of what to expect. Understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this comes back to something I've had as kind of a personal mantra when it comes to disagreements. We don't compromise, we find common ground. And I think y'all have done a really good job in Utah of doing that. I don't think that